who wrote those bios, Peg. Hey. Peter Perlucas was the only friend I could have ever called a best friend. He was Italian, but he wasn't, because he was adopted. His mom was a one-woman assembly line of food, feeding us cheese-laden breaded dishes bathed in olive oil with names I couldn't begin to pronounce, let alone spell. Tastes so different from anything I'd ever put in my mouth. I wasn't ever quite sure they were supposed to be eaten. She had hair in places women normally didn't, and there was something around her eyes, a Mediterranean depth that belied any Midwest roots. Her ankles were as big as my father's, but she had an olive beauty that you could make out just below the surface. His dad was stout and had a Boston accent, despite being from Missouri. He always sat by the TV with a pipe and nodded at Peter and me as we'd go in and out of the house, tapping his pipe loudly on the end table if we forgot to shut the door behind us. Pete had reddish hair and freckles, with a rabbit's overbite, and the build of someone who tried hard to be athletic, despite all that nature held back. You could see in his body the things he tried hard to be. They reached out like arms grasping for something perpetually out of reach. It earned him the nickname Little Italy. We were both outcasts, me by choice, sort of, and him in defiance of his will. Of course, outcasts still stuck to the herd back in grade school. She tried so hard to fit in that it made the chances of such a thing happening hopeless. I'm not sure if he settled for me, or if there was some kind of magnetics that brought us together. Either way, he would shed tears in front of me about his brother, who beat up on him, about his height, about everything that he kept inside. He'd always end these confessionals by pretending it was all in jest, but there was a spark of knowing in his eyes, a silent pact he was making with me. When we were at school, though, and the kids would get bored and start picking on him, he'd turn on me, every time. He'd tell them things that had no basis in fact, but would do the trick of rerouting the attention from him to me. For my part, I'd mostly take it in stride, letting it wash over me. I remember one day not long after my father disappeared, Ed Thorpe, who looked like he'd been held back in 5th grade for the last 5 years, asked in a mocking bellow so that everyone could hear, "Hey, Indiana, is it true you took a bath with your mom last night?" "No," I remember answering calmly. "It was your mom." That incident sent me to the nurses and then to Dr. Handler's for stitches. Peter would never disclose to others any real confession I made to him. The ones he let loose were from out of nowhere. I wonder if they might have been things that were true in his life, things he was embarrassed about. I knew he'd never let slip anything we really talked about. He had much more to lose in breaking the bond of trust we had. Whenever we were alone, we'd never discuss it, why he'd turn on me and make up those lies. Partly because I think both of us knew why, but the words were too big to fit through our lips. We were playing War in the Woods behind Pete's house one afternoon. We had his father's army gear, which we'd snuck out of the garage. It had just rained the day before, and everything was mushy, except the air, which was crisp. I'd captured him and was standing over his body, his arms pinned under my feet. He kept saying I could wear the gear next, but it would always be 5 more minutes. I held it in my hands, the heavy metal helmet he'd been wearing. We looked at each other. It was a dull brown green, and I held it over him, examining it like it was a spoil of war as he looked up at me from the ground. I caught his eye, and both by accident and on purpose, I dropped it. The hard-stained helmet came down on his face, catching his buck rabbit teeth and making a loud clink that echoed as if it were a BB gun being hit by a bell. I watched the sound escape through the branches above like a bird fleeing. He let out a loud that rose in volume as he got up and felt his lips, which were bleeding. I was frozen with shock, not quite believing what I had just done. I didn't do that, was the first thing I said. When he took his hands away from his mouth, I could see both of his front teeth had been chipped. "My mom's gonna fucking kill you," he lisped. A speck of blood flew out as he spoke, landing on my soiled white t-shirt. In between the dots of mud, it almost blended in, and I thought to myself, maybe no one will notice. Halfway through 8th grade, they found the cancer in his stomach. It was the size of a baseball. He spent 4 weeks at the hospital up in Iowa City and then died. I found out the day after our middle school graduation party, the one where I kissed Sally Potter behind Ed Nance's gazebo. I'd never visited Pete in the hospital, not once. Not because I was scared or angry, not because I didn't love him. Things were just moving in their own direction. I didn't know I had a choice. Or maybe I didn't want to know. I saw his mom. She came to our graduation 2 days after he died and wailed the whole time like the woman in those spaghetti westerns or The Godfather, dressed in black and huddled in the midst of consoling arms. Her olive was just a dull green now. I avoided her the whole time like I had when she'd come to our house, offering to take me to the hospital so I could see Peter. I was always gone or hiding when she came. It was weird, but my mom never pressured me. Maybe because of my father. Maybe for some other reason I didn't understand. I was coming out of the bathroom after the ceremony. Everyone had left. I was staying back to help clean up the gym in exchange for some missing PE credits I needed to graduate. She was there waiting. No one else was in the gym where the ceremony had been. The silence ricocheted off the walls like the sound of basketballs dribbling. I was cemented to the ground with the bathroom door swinging behind me. I wondered where all the women were that had been consoling her, propping her up. I hadn't seen that she could stand on her own before. She looked like a black cloud being carried through a crowd. Now she stood squat, suspended by those thick ankles, girders propping up a leaning tower. And I wondered if it was evolutionary biology that gave her those ankles, knowing she would one day have to support herself under a weight that normal anatomy would never have allowed. She broke what seemed to be an infinite silence. "He loved you, Gary," she pleaded. "He loved you." I wish I could have cried, broken down right there and held her, or at least have her hold me. Those words physically took something from me, but I was silent. I couldn't even move. After what felt like minutes, she left me standing there. I continued to stand there, unmoving, unblinking, until my mother came in to look for me. "Gary, I've been waiting outside for like 20 minutes. "I'll walk." She surveyed me warily and started to say something, then hesitated. "Please," I half whispered. "I'll walk." As I watched her walk off, I thought how Peter had turned on me, those moments in the playground. And I wondered if subconsciously I had avoided him on his deathbed, some form of retribution. But I thought about how retribution isn't something given for something, is something given for something taken. If it were retribution, I would have been left with something in exchange for what had been taken. But as hard as I looked around the gymnasium, and in my heart, for something that might have been left, I couldn't see or feel the thing. Thanks.